Good afternoon, everyone. With regard to the events in Baltimore, obviously our hearts go out to those who've been injured and the other activities that have occurred there that are so regretful. I hope the investigation into illegal behavior will be concluded soon, and those who've been engaged in criminal behavior would be promptly pursued and charged. With regard to the Senate, we hope to approve the budget conference report this week. We also, as you know, have the Iran sanctions bill on the floor, open for amendment, and hope to begin, Chairman Corker and Senator Cardin hope to begin to process amendments this afternoon. I've asked Senator Fisher to join us today to give you a few words on trade, and I'll call on her now.
Thank you. Nebraska is a leader in exporting, and we are a leader in producing ag products and manufacturing products in our state. When we look at 2013, Nebraska exported $7.3 billion in products that are tied to our ag and our processing industries. You know, that is really big for a state like Nebraska. It has a huge impact on our families. It has a huge impact on our economies. When we trade internationally, we create jobs, we raise incomes for people all across this country. That's why this trade agreement is so important. And we need to make sure that we have that opportunity to be at the table. Because if we aren't at the table, we can't expand into new markets. We can't find those new customers for our products. If we're going to continue to take care of the people in this country to make sure that they can take care of their families, that means that we have to look at raising incomes, we have to look at creating jobs, and we do that through trade. So I support the TPA. I think it's very, very important. It's important that we have these new markets so that families can continue to have good jobs. We understand that in the state of Nebraska. And I think all across this country, people understand the importance of trading internationally and the impact it has on their families and on the economy of their states.
I agree with everything Senator Fisher just said on trade, and I look forward to getting into that debate soon. But this week we're going to be debating what I think is the premier national security issue of our time. And we're going to have an opportunity to weigh in on an Iranian nuclear agreement. And I think any Iranian nuclear agreement should have one goal, and that is to permanently prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. And I'm going to offer an amendment because I'm concerned about the inspections aspect of this agreement that would require the Secretary of State to investigate whether the IAEA would have access to military sites that are suspected of being sites where they're doing nuclear activities. And so I think we have to answer the question for the American people about whether or not we're really going to have access to a lot of these facilities and whether there's going to be a strong inspections regime in place. The question we American people are going to be asking is, can we really trust the Iranians to comply with this kind of a nuclear agreement? But I'm hopeful that when it's all said and done and we have an open amendment process here this week, that we'll be able to move forward with this legislation. I'm encouraged by the fact that we got here because of bipartisan cooperation. We saw the Republicans and the Democrats working together in a way that we are seeing a lot more of these days, and I hope we'll see more of in the future. But hopefully we'll put the U.S. Congress and, more importantly, the American people in a position where they're ultimately going to have a voice in any deal that is struck with the Iranians on this incredibly important issue of our time.
The debate on the floor about Iran may be one of the most consequential debates, discussions, and votes that this Senate takes in this decade. I was part of the Foreign Relations Committee, supported the bipartisan deal. Still believe, though, that any deal that comes out with the President has to be accountable, enforceable, verifiable, and that Iran with a nuclear weapon makes the world less safe, less stable, less secure. Secretary Kerry yesterday was at a UN conference talking about nuclear disarmament worldwide. What I see, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it's going to go in the exact opposite direction. You will have an escalation and a quest for nuclear weapons by others in the region, by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, the Emirates. So I have great concerns of Iran with a nuclear weapon. I'm going to be bringing an amendment to this bill as well. It was actually something that was in the original bipartisan agreement that came out, the bill that Senator Corker initially sponsored, which was then amended right before the final vote in the Foreign Relations Committee. They had taken out the part that had to do with terrorism, and Iran is a sponsor of terror. I mean, let's face it, Iran wants the money. They want sanction relief, so they get all of this money, and my big concern is they're going to use the money to support additional terror against Americans, terror around the world. My amendment simply states that the President needs to certify every 90 days, as he does with many other parts of the framework that he's described, that Iran is not engaged in supporting terrorism against America and Americans, or Congress can act expeditiously.
I think the Iran agreement discussion will provide an opportunity to talk about a number of things, some of which many of us have been talking about for a long time. I'm still amazed that 2 years into these negotiations, the Iranians still hold prisoner a Christian pastor, a Washington journalist, a decorated former Marine, and a former employee of the FBI. No good faith effort to bring those people forward and release those people. I think that's part of the discussion we ought to have, but this is a state that is a bad actor in so many ways that I think this debate creates not only an opportunity to talk about that, but also to talk about the kinds of things that should be an agreement before an agreement is made and should monitor an agreement going forward.
Mr. Boehner?
Yeah.
The National Football League indicated in a letter to Paul Ryan today that this year it had declined its tax-exempt status in its filing with the IRS this year, so it's no longer a tax-exempt organization. Do you have a reaction?
Yeah, I just heard about it from you this minute, so I suppose I don't yet.
Senator McConnell, do you discourage any amendments that are being offered by your members that could hurt Democratic support for this Iran bill?
Well, you know, I said a year ago that if we were given the majority, we would, on most occasions, have an open amendment process. And I think that applies certainly to an issue of this magnitude. And members need to be able to offer their ideas and get votes on them. We've been doing that all year. It's been a new experience for a huge number of senators, but I think they've been able to survive it. I see them still active and interested. And as several of our colleagues have just said, this is a really important issue, and I think we ought to have a full and open and robust amendment process, and I believe that's what we'll have. Well, I think that's been their position for a number of years, so it's certainly not surprising. We hope to complete the budget conference report in the House and Senate, get going on the appropriations process, and we'll have plenty of disagreements over how the money is spent during the process. But what I'd like to have is an amendment process that actually brings up individual bills, brings them across the floor. They're open for amendment. Senators have an opportunity to make their complaints, and I'm sure the Democrats will complain, as they did to you a few moments ago, that we're not spending enough on the domestic side. But all of that to be sorted out in the appropriations process.
TPA?
A TPA?
Yes, when are you going to bring it to the floor?
Very soon, very soon. I was very pleased, as you can imagine, with the vote in the Finance Committee last week. I think 20-6 was extremely significant. When we look back on this Congress, with the possible exception of the Iran nuclear issue, putting America back in the trade business could be the biggest accomplishment of this Congress. Second, I think it's important and I've said this repeatedly to my Republican colleagues, this is not a trade promotion authority just for Barack Obama. This is a 6-year deal. It means the next president, whoever that is, can be engaged with the rest of the world in trying to promote American exports, and I think that's important for our country.
Do you have 60 votes?